Paris was supposed to be celebrating. Bells were ringing, banners were flying, and the streets were packed for a royal wedding that was meant to bring peace. The French king had arranged for his sister, Margaret of Valois, to marry Henry of Navarre, the young leader of the French Protestants. After years of fights, protests, and riots between Catholics and Protestants, this wedding was supposed to calm everything down. But underneath the cheers, fear was spreading. Many Catholics hated the idea of a Protestant leader standing so close to the throne. Many Protestants didn't trust the royal court at all. Everyone smiled in public, but no one felt safe. Paris felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came sooner than anyone expected. Only a few days after the wedding, someone tried to assassinate Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the top Protestant leaders in France. A bullet tore through his hand and arm as he walked down the street. Coligny survived, but the message was clear. Someone wanted him dead. His followers demanded justice. They marched to the king and said, "Find who did this, or there will be trouble." The royal court panicked. Powerful Catholic leaders, especially the Duke of Guise, feared the Protestants might rebel. Queen Catherine de' Medici believed the Protestants were becoming too strong and could soon threaten her own power. Rumors spread that the Protestants were planning to strike back. Instead of calming the city, the royal family made the worst decision possible. Late on the night of August 23rd, 1572, King Charles IX held a secret meeting with his advisors. No one knows exactly what was said, but one thing is certain. They agreed on a plan that would change France forever. They ordered the military and the local Catholic militia to kill the Protestant leaders in Paris before sunrise. It was supposed to be a quick, limited attack. It turned into a nightmare. Just after midnight, the bells of the Church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois began to ring. People woke up confused, thinking it was a fire alarm. But when they looked outside, they saw armed men marching through the streets with white armbands, the sign of Catholic fighters. Soldiers kicked down doors. They shouted names from lists. Anyone known as a Protestant was dragged out of their house. Then the killing began. The attackers moved fast. They started with the important Protestant leaders staying near the Louvre Palace. Many were still sleeping after days of celebration. Soldiers smashed through windows, tore open shutters, and dragged men out of their beds before they even knew what was happening. Some Protestants tried to escape by climbing onto rooftops or jumping into nearby gardens, but the killers chased them down. Admiral Coligny, the man who had survived the shooting only days earlier, was one of the first targets. He was hurt and resting, unable to run. When soldiers burst into his room, he knew what was coming. His servants begged for mercy, but the attackers pushed them aside. Coligny told them he forgave them, but they killed him anyway and threw his body out the window, so the Duke of Guise could see proof of his death. Once the first murders happened, Paris fell into complete chaos. The plan had been to kill only the Protestant leaders. But the anger, fear, and hate in the city were too strong. When regular citizens heard the shouts and saw bodies in the streets, they joined in. Crowds formed fast. People grabbed clubs, knives, and anything they could use as weapons. Old grudges came back to life. Some neighbors went after families they had known for years. Even children weren't safe. The city turned into a maze of screams, fire, and running feet. People smashed down doors, ripped apart furniture, and dragged people outside. Men begged for mercy. Women cried for their children. The killers didn't care. They believed they were doing God's work by destroying heretics, a word Catholics used for Protestants. The Catholic leaders realized they had lost control, but it was too late. King Charles IX, who had ordered the attack the night before, stepped out onto the balcony of the Louvre and looked down at the burning streets. What he saw terrified him. He hadn't expected this level of violence. Some historians believe he was so shaken that he later said, "Kill them all, Kill them all, so the blame is on me alone. But even if he didn't say it, the killing continued. Bodies filled the streets. The Seine River became a dumping ground. Witnesses wrote that the water turned red, and dead bodies floated past bridges for days. Dogs and pigs fed on corpses. People hid in barrels, chimneys, and church cellars, hoping to survive. One Protestant woman tried to escape by pretending to be dead. She lay under a pile of bodies for hours, holding her breath. When she thought the killers were gone, she crawled out slowly, trying not to scream from the pain. But a soldier spotted her and ended her life on the spot. Some Catholics were horrified by what they saw and tried to protect their Protestant friends. They hid people in attics or locked them inside secret rooms. A few even stood in front of their neighbors' doors and refused to let the mob in. These brave acts saved hundreds of lives. But they were rare. Most of the city went along with the violence or looked the other way. For 3 days, Paris was a nightmare. Then the violence spread even farther, when news of the killings reached other towns in France. Some cities copied what Paris had done. In places like Lyon, Rouen, and Toulouse, local Catholic leaders and angry mobs started their own massacres. Some towns refused to join, but many did. Historians believe that between 5,000 and 10,000 Protestants were killed across France, maybe more. Records from the time are not exact because many bodies were burned or thrown into rivers. Henry of Navarre, the Protestant groom from the royal wedding, should have been dead too. He was the most important Protestant in France. But he survived only because Queen Catherine and King Charles forced him to convert to Catholicism hours after the killings began. Trapped in the Louvre palace with troops outside, he had no choice if he wanted to stay alive. For the next 4 years, Henry lived like a prisoner in the royal court. At public events, he smiled. At banquets, he raised his cup. But he never forgot what happened in Paris. He later said that he pretended to be Catholic only on the outside, never in his heart. When he finally escaped, he returned to the Protestant faith and became one of the most powerful rulers Europe had ever seen. But that comes later. Back in 1572, France was falling apart. The massacre destroyed any hope of peace between Catholics and Protestants in the country. Before this, there had been fights and small wars, but there were also treaties, marriages, and moments of calm. After the massacre, trust was completely gone. Protestants across Europe were shocked and angry. Many believed the Pope and Catholic rulers had planned the whole thing. Catholic leaders denied this, but the damage was done. Foreign countries reacted quickly. Protestant nations like England and the Dutch Republic declared that France was now under the control of violent religious fanatics. Refugees poured out of France into Switzerland, Germany, and England, telling stories of the horrors they had seen. Inside France, the Protestants, known as huguenots, gathered and swore never to let themselves be trapped like that again. They strengthened their armies, fortified their cities, and prepared for long war. Catholics also grew more determined. The massacre had convinced them that Protestants were dangerous and had to be kept away from power. This set the stage for one of the most violent periods in French history. Over the next 20 years, France suffered through more civil wars, assassinations, riots, and betrayals than almost any other European country at the time. Kings were stabbed, cities burned, armies starved. It seemed like God had abandoned France, but the biggest twist was still ahead. In 1589, after years of chaos and killing, Henry of Navarre, the same man who survived the massacre, became the rightful king of France. Catholics refused to accept a Protestant king, so Henry fought a long war to claim his throne. He won battle after battle, but still couldn't enter Paris. Finally, he made one of the most famous decisions in history. He converted to Catholicism again, this time as a political move. When church officials asked why he changed religions again, he answered with a line that became legendary. "Paris is worth a mass." Henry was crowned as King Henry IV, and under his rule, France finally began to heal. In 1598, he created the Edict of Nantes, a law that gave Protestants the right to worship freely and protected them from violence. It was the first real step toward peace since the Massacre. But the scars remained, and they still shape France today. Even with the Edict of Nantes bringing peace, France was still wounded. The memories of that terrible night in Paris would not go away. People whispered the stories to their children. Survivors carried nightmares for the rest of their lives, and many towns that lost whole families never recovered. Henry IV worked hard to rebuild the country. Roads were repaired, farmland was protected, markets reopened. Henry wanted France to grow strong again, and for a while, it did. People were tired of war. They wanted to plant crops, raise children, and stop worrying about who believed what. But peace never stays simple. Some Catholic leaders were furious that Henry gave Protestants any rights at all. They believed only one religion should exist in the kingdom. They spread rumors that Henry had betrayed the true faith. At the same time, many Protestants felt nervous, unsure if the Catholic majority truly accepted them or just pretended to. But Henry pressed on anyway. He wanted unity. Ironically, the man who had survived the massacre and ruled wisely for years eventually died at the hands of a religious fanatic. In 1610, Henry IV was stabbed to death in his own carriage by a Catholic extremist named François Ravaillac, who claimed angels told him to kill the king. Henry's assassination shocked France, and it brought back all the fears and divisions people thought were gone. His young son, Louis XIII, became king, but he was only 9 years old. His mother, Marie de Medici, ruled in his place for several years. She was strong-willed, but not as skillful as Henry. She trusted the wrong advisors, and the country began to fall back into confusion. Soon a new powerful figure rose to control France, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu was not a man of peace. He believed France could only survive if the king had full power, and if all threats, both inside and outside the kingdom, were crushed. He also believed Protestants were still too strong and could one day challenge the king again. Under Richelieu, France moved closer to a police state. Informers, spies, and secret reports filled the royal court. Richelieu watched everyone and trusted almost no one. He knew that both Protestants and Catholics could become enemies if they disagreed with the crown. Inside the kingdom, Richelieu took slow, careful steps to weaken Protestant political power. He didn't want another massacre. He didn't want riots. He wanted control. And he preferred doing it through sieges, not street killings. The biggest symbol of Protestant power was the fortified city of La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast. It was a wealthy port, well defended and loyal to the Protestant cause. Richelieu believed that as long as La Rochelle stood strong, France would never truly be united. So he decided to crush it. In 1627, France began the siege of La Rochelle, one of the most dramatic events of the entire century. French royal troops surrounded the city, cutting off supplies. Richelieu ordered a massive seawall to be built across the harbor to block English ships trying to help the Protestants inside. It was a brutal, slow-motion disaster. Inside La Rochelle, people starved. They ate rats, grass, and even leather from belts and shoes. Disease spread. Families buried their dead in secret, so enemies would not see signs of weakness. Still, the defenders held on for more than a year. When the city finally surrendered, it had lost almost half its population. This moment effectively ended the era of Protestant military resistance in France. The Edict of Nantes stayed in place, but the message was clear. The king would tolerate Protestant worship, but never Protestant independence. Richelieu died in 1642, and King Louis XIII died the next year. Their successor, King Louis XIV, was much more extreme. Louis XIV, the Sun King, believed that he alone was chosen by God to rule France. He wanted absolute power, and he wanted religious unity even more. In his eyes, Protestants were outsiders who might disobey him the moment things grew difficult. So in 1685, Louis XIV made a fateful decision. He revoked the Edict of Nantes, making Protestant worship illegal again. Churches were destroyed. Schools were shut down. Children were taken from their parents and raised as Catholics. Many Protestants were forced to convert or flee the country. Hundreds of thousands escaped to places like Switzerland, England, the Netherlands, and even North America. Many of these refugees were skilled workers: blacksmiths, weavers, teachers, doctors. Their loss weakened France's economy and helped make France's enemies stronger. This new wave of oppression wasn't a massacre, like the one in 1572, but it showed that the lessons from that terrible night had never truly been learned. Hatred, fear, and the desire for control still drove many of the kingdom's decisions. Still, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre remained the darkest symbol of what religious rage could do in France. People used it as a warning for generations. Never again should we let our neighbors become our enemies. Artists painted the massacre. Writers described its horrors. Foreign rulers used it as propaganda. Protestants across Europe used it as proof that Catholic rulers could never be trusted. Catholics defended themselves by saying the massacre was a tragic mistake that should have never happened. But no matter how people framed it, that the event changed France forever. When the French Revolution arrived in 1789, more than 200 years later, protesters stormed the Bastille and shouted that the old government was filled with cruelty and corruption. Many revolutionaries believed the monarchy had a long history of hurting its own people. They pointed all the way back to the massacre as proof. In a strange way, the killings of 1572 helped fuel the anger that would eventually bring down the French monarchy itself. By the time modern France emerged in the 1800s and 1900s, the country had rewritten its identity. Instead of being a kingdom tied to one religion, France became a republic that valued liberty, equality, and fraternity. Religious freedom became an important part of this new identity, partly because of how terrible things once were. Today, historians still debate the massacre. Was it planned from the start? Did the king panic? Did Catherine de' Medici order the killings? How many people died? Was it a political move or a religious one? No matter the answers, one truth remains. It showed what happens when fear and power take control of a country. The massacre was not just a battle, not just a riot, not just a political plot. It was a moment when ordinary people, neighbors, friends, and even families turned against each other because they believed their faith demanded it. And the river that ran red through the heart of Paris became a symbol of what hatred can do when leaders fail to stop it. Even centuries later, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre still stands out as one of the most shocking events in European history. It wasn't a foreign invasion, a planned battle, or a fight between armies. It was neighbors killing neighbors. It was fear mixed with anger, mixed with politics, mixed with religion, all exploding at the same time. For France, the massacre became a warning about what happens when leaders use fear to control people, a warning about what can happen when rumors grow faster than the truth, a warning about how quickly a crowd can turn into a mob. The massacre also helped shape the idea that religious freedom matters. Before this event, many rulers believed everyone in a country should follow one faith. But after the massacre, many people realized that forcing everyone to believe the same thing only leads to violence and rebellion. Over time, countries across Europe began to understand that peace requires tolerance, not control. For the Protestants who survived, the memory of that night stayed with them forever. Families told the story to their children and grandchildren. They taught them to be careful, to stay strong, and to never forget what happened. In many ways, the massacre strengthened their identity and gave them a sense of unity. For Catholics who opposed the killings, the event was a source of shame. Many wrote letters and books saying the massacre was unjust and against the teachings of their faith. They argued that the Church should focus on forgiveness and charity, not punishment and fear. As time passed, the massacre also changed how historians studied the past. Instead of seeing kings and queens as perfect leaders, people started looking at their mistakes and weaknesses. The event showed that even powerful rulers can make terrible decisions when they are afraid or desperate. By the modern era, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre became a symbol of the dangers of political violence, religious extremism, and unchecked power. It is often taught in schools, written about in books, and shown in films to remind people of how fragile peace can be. Today, the streets of Paris look peaceful. Tourists walk through the narrow alleys and cross the bridges over the Seine without knowing the horrors that once happened there. The church bells still ring, but now they call people to worship freely without fear of soldiers or mobs at their door. And yet, the story of that night survives. It survives in the paintings showing bodies in the river. It survives in the reports written by frightened witnesses. It survives in the laws and ideas that grew from the tragedy. Most of all, it survives because it teaches a lesson the world can't afford to forget. When hatred is allowed to grow, when fear is left unchecked, and when leaders choose violence over reason, tragedies like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre can happen again. Remembering the past does not bring back the dead, but it can help protect the living. And that is why the story of the massacre still matters today.